Vasudevaya. So tonight I was going to tell you about a very ancient Puranic account of some amazing questions that were put to a king. One of which was, what is most wonderful? And I think if we think of that question in our mind, what would we categorize as wonderful? Meaning it really inspires wonder. So one of the ancient epics is this wonderful work known as the Mahabharata, which deals largely with one great dynasty. There were five young brothers who were sons of a king, and the king died an untimely death, and the four young boys were in an extremely vulnerable position. Their uncle became the regent to administer the kingdom. His problem, although he was the elder brother of the former king and should have been the king, he was blind, physically blind. And so that disqualified one from being king, because you really need to have your faculties firing on all cylinders to administer a kingdom. And what happened was the sons of the blind regent plotted to take over the kingdom, take it away from their cousins. And so there were assassination attempts. I mean, it got so bad. As young children, they had to flee and live in hiding for many years. And they eventually resurfaced and attempted to reclaim the kingdom, and became entrapped in intrigue and cheating, where they were again cheated and sent into exile, where they had to live in the forest for 12 years. And then the deal was, on the 13th year, if they were discovered, they had to go into exile another 12 years. So that 1 year they had to really live incognito. So it was just like this really horrific. I mean, if you read it carefully, it's like enough to make someone almost cry. It was bitterly sad what they had to go through. But these five young guys, they were very heroic and incredibly righteous, principled individuals. This story that I'm going to speak to you about, and some of the other ones I've spoken of, people can either consider them to be tales, or they can consider them to be like historical accounts. Because it happened so long ago, there is no modern historical context to support, although a number of the things that occurred during this period have been demonstrated to be true. So myself, I accept these to be truthful accounts, but one is not required to do that. But if you listen carefully and contemplate upon the message in these accounts, they can transform and guide a person in their life. So while living in the 12th year of their exile, they would often, living in the forest, they would often make friends with the sages and mystics who resided in these places and were deeply absorbed in meditation, and the performance of sacrificial offering. They had this system of spiritual contemplation and worship, where they built a fire using either mantra for those who are extremely developed, or through using fire sticks. They would create a fire, and it had to be done in a very precise manner. And there were the chanting of sacred mantras and offering of oblations into the fire. And it would result in, they were done not just for personal benefit, but these sages and mystics performed these activities seeking to improve the experience of life for the general population. They performed tremendous austerity, lived very austere lives. So one of the sages living in the area where the Pandavas were, his bundle of fire sticks and the ladle that they would use for offering oblations into the fire, and some of his written scripts, books on how to do things and everything, it was all tied together. And a deer had come by and hooked it with its antler, and it was stuck on its antler, and it took off. And so he was like really freaked out, because this was, the core of all of his spiritual kind of activities had just taken off through the forest. And so he asked these 5 brothers if they could help him. So they immediately ran off, grabbed their bows and stuff, and ran off through the forest, tracking this deer. And of course the deer could hear them and was moving at speed. And so this thing went on the whole day. This whole day they were seeking to find this deer. And it got to the point where they thought they weren't able to get it. And they were utterly exhausted, and because they'd left so suddenly, there was no water. And so, it's India, all right? It's not like New Zealand. It's hot, and you run through the forest all day. You are going to be exhausted and parched to the point of almost death. So, being incredibly exhausted, the eldest brother, Yudhishthira, he asked the young brother to climb the tree and to see if there are any water sources nearby. So he did that, and he spotted a place not too far away. And everybody was utterly exhausted. So he asked him, could you go and fetch water and bring it back? So they take the arrows out of the quiver, and they're going to use the arrow quiver to bring water. He ran off. So they were waiting and waiting, and he didn't return. And it was like something wrong. So they asked the other younger brother, please go take a look, and he didn't return. And so soon all four brothers had gone and not come back. And so Yudhishthira alone remained, and he had stayed behind when the last one, in case they had got lost and came back through another trail. And so he thought he'd better stay where he is when the last one went off. So now he had to go, and he came upon this body of water, and he saw his brothers looking like they were dead. There were no signs of pulse, there was no breathing. But he did notice something unusual. The bodily luster hadn't faded. Usually when somebody dies, it's like instant. You see an incredible change in the skin tone and everything. But their bodily luster looked okay, but there was no symptom of life. And so he thought, he was deeply in thought, what has caused the death of them, and how can I do something about this? But first I need to take water. And he moved to take water, and suddenly this mystical being appeared before him and told him that he was the proprietor of this lake in the forest, that this was his territory, and his brothers had refused to comply with his request that they should first answer some questions before being allowed to take water. And they had just ignored this person like, what the... and just made a dash for the water, and instantly they just dropped. So Yudhisthira, seeing the predicament, so he said, okay, go ahead, ask me. What is it that you want to ask? And so this personality who had appeared as what was called a yaksha, he began to fire, rapid fire questions to Yudhisthira, who had to answer. These series of questions and answers are absolutely fascinating. I mean, it's just like quite mind-boggling, especially for people in our time. We have become untethered from older realities of life. We live in a time where we are so disconnected. People are destroying themselves mentally and physically, and destroying the world at such breakneck speed. It's mind-boggling. The rise in unhappiness and depression and suicide are all evidence of how sick things are. And yet, in spite of the symptoms of these grave sicknesses afflicting society, nobody's going to put on the handbrake. We're just like going for it. We're going to try and wing it and sort of fix things as we go. But this is all indicative of how untethered we have become from more ancient cultures, where value systems that have existed for thousands of years have now become just abandoned for no good reason and with no good result. And so some of these questions, when I read them, they would seem a little bit even odd because of the way that we have chosen to change. It's a conscious choice, this change that we're undertaking. So he asks so many. I'm just going to read a few of them, because until we get to the end one that I was going to talk about. So the first series is, he asks 4 questions, back to really quick. What makes the soul rise out of its entanglement in matter? So there is this understanding that we are eternal spiritual beings, and we have become deeply entangled in the material energy, in the material world, to the degree that we are utterly convinced the body we have on is us, and it's not. That's as far from reality as you can possibly get, and yet we are steeped in that thought. So what makes the soul rise out of its entanglement in matter? Second, who keeps him company, and who is his guide on that spiritual journey, and on what is he established? I mean, already, if we were asked to answer these questions, it's like, well, we'd have to really think about it, if it was a life and death situation in particular. So Yudhisthira, without hesitation, because of his incredibly fine mind and his character that was like saintly, he was a great warrior, but he was like a very saintly, very righteous sort of nature. So he says, it is knowledge of the Supreme Soul which makes it so the soul can rise out of his entanglement. The cultivation of godly qualities become his companion. And it is dharma, or righteousness, or righteous living, becomes one's guide. And that person becomes established on truth. I mean, truth, we've entered this time where everybody is utterly convinced that you can have your truth and I can have my truth. In other words, the way I see things is true. And if you see things differently, well, that may be true for you, but it's not true for me. Hey, this is what happens in an insane asylum. Everybody's got their own truth. I'm sorry, this is probably I might offend some people speaking about these kind of things, but it is a sign of a great problem, a great social problem, when people cannot establish and adhere to a common truth. A common truth is what will really bind people together, and that truth needs to be spiritual at its foundational level. So then he asked the next question. The Yaksha asked, what makes one learned? How does one attain to that which is exalted? What? How does one attain to that which is exalted? We don't even think of being exalted. That's kind of like, what? We think of being cool or hip or badass or whatever, but these are just words that have replaced exalted. But what does it really mean to be exalted? And how does one acquire a second self? And by what, O king, does one become wise? So he answered, one becomes learned by studying the Vedas. The Vedas, this word Veda means knowledge. This is the meaning of this word, Veda. And this was a vast collection of works that were mostly spiritual, but also dealt with politics and social management and health and all kinds of different things. And this is just like, what? By asceticism, one attains that which is most exalted. To become an ascetic, to live a life of tremendous simplicity and frugalness, to restrain the senses, to not just give in to impulse and desire and things of the mind. I mean, we live in a society and a time where this is just like, what? This is considered counterproductive to living a cool and engaged life in the world now. But in older times, and we're going to pay a great price. I mean, this whole thing with what they, talk about with climate, change and disruptions and all the things that are coming down the track. This has all come about by having no attraction to the principle of restraint. To be unrestrained in everything that you do is considered to be like an animal. To show restraint. Problem is, human beings aren't like animals. Animals actually exercise some restraint. When they've had enough, they walk away. They don't really, animals generally, unless people have got hold of them. I mean, I just saw this thing on a news feed. Some person had a dog, they got it from a shelter, it was 100 pounds overweight. And it couldn't even hardly walk or move, and so it was going to be put down. And somebody saw it and adopted it and put it on a diet and exercised it and got it in a pool walking on a thing, And it lost 100 pounds. A dog lost 100. That's not natural. Animals won't do that naturally. It's screwed up humans that do them. And that's a reflection on our own self. So, by asceticism, one attains what is most exalted. Intelligence is considered like the second self, and serving one's elders makes one wise. These things are just like, we can't even relate. And I mean, I was watching a program. I mean, I've had the fortune of living at a young age in cultures where poverty was common, where people lived on the side of the street and their belongings were this much, and they had one bucket and they bathed and did everything there on the side of the street, and they acquired simple foods and cook them on branches and twigs and things, and they lived there with families. And people in the Western world, they think, oh my God, that's so horrible. What a horrible, suffering life. But if you hang out with them, yeah, they're experiencing hardship, but most of them are not on a bummer. Most of them are happier than the average. Actually, they're in a state of a better headspace than the average Kiwi. And that's not an exaggeration. So living in those kind of cultures, and when I first got married to my wife, it was rather unusual circumstances, and we had to sort of beat it to the mountains. And I learned how to build a house with a blade, a machete, a bolo, without nails or anything. How to do a thatched roof, how to grow rice, how to, every morning, if you want to eat, you've got to pound the rice and winnow it and off the husk, and you cook it and prepare it. This is a very healthy lifestyle. And while it is physically demanding, it is not unpleasant. It is not unhappy. You don't feel empty. And so these values that they speak of here, like, asceticism, and then this one here, that by serving one's elders, it makes one wise. The willingness to listen to people who have gone through the experience of life, who can give advice. Be careful of that. Don't do that. These are the potential consequences. I mean, I was a total rebel. I would not listen to my parents ever. I was, really quite rebellious. And of course, we were quite proud of being so rebellious and independent. But actually, you become deprived of wisdom. You get deprived of what gets handed down generationally that grounds you, and gives you tools to navigate life. So then the Yaksha asked, what is the greatest virtue in the world? What is it that which, if controlled, never leads men to misery? And with whom does friendship never break? So he responded that abstention from harming any creature is the greatest virtue. That's actually quite stunning. If we lived a life where we consciously sought not to harm any creature, any living being, we would be considered virtuous. Now we live in a time where people are constantly pitted against each other. The general population is simply seen as a market to be exploited. They have taken all of the psychology of understanding gambling and other forms of dependency, and used that psychology to design social media. Is that virtuous? We say we're more connected. They say their aspiration is to connect everybody. But no, we're becoming more disconnected. There is no virtue in it. The mind, so one of the questions was, what is it which, if controlled, never leads a person to misery? Any thought on that one? And his answer was, the mind, if controlled, never leads to misery. An uncontrolled mind is the foundation of unhappiness. And friendship with the righteous is something which never breaks. So then he was asked, what is it that by renouncing a person becomes dear to others? What is it, if given up, never leads to misery? And what is it, if renounced, leads to wealth? I mean, these are two like opposite ideas. The ideas of renunciation, of giving something away, it's sort of like, okay, how can you acquire wealth? And what is it which, if renounced, leads to happiness? And his instant response was, giving up pride makes one dear to others. Giving up pride. If one is not prideful, one will never fight, argue over petty things. I mean, you look at our lives. We exist now in this age, in Vedic terms it is called Kali Yuga, which means the age of great quarrel and confusion, where one of the hallmarks of this time is the willingness of people to argue over anything. And the most petty things turn into huge arguments that cause pain and suffering and makes us hardened in our hearts towards each other, does it not? And the foundation of this problem is pride. This false pride. Giving up pride makes one dear to others. And then he was asked, of course, what is it that if you abandon never leads to misery? And he said, abandoning anger never leads to misery. I mean, these things we're just touching on, and unfortunately, because, it's just part of this story. But actually, each thing we can discuss and talk about, and they're transformative. If we actually embrace these principles, our lives would become extremely, not just okay, but actually very happy and healthy. Desire, if renounced, makes one wealthy. And the abandonment of avarice. Avarice is the greed for money. The abandonment of avarice leads to happiness. And this is the opposite to what we are hearing. The messaging that we're receiving is that your happiness will be found in the acquisition of wealth, because through wealth you can increase the amount of experience and sensual stimulation and everything. And here they're saying the opposite. The abandonment of avarice actually leads to happiness. You become forced to now look at other things in life. So it really goes on for quite a long time. I mean, I got so many here, and it was already a greatly shortened list, but it's gone on enough. We will jump to the last one. This mystical personality, this Yaksha, hearing the answers, well, it was stunning to him. And he said he was very satisfied with his response. He said, I have 4 final questions for you. 1, he said, he was so satisfied, he said, if you answer these 4 questions appropriately, I will restore the life of one of your brothers. So he asked him, who in this world is happy? Second question, what is the most wonderful thing? What are the tidings of this world? And how can one find the eternal path? The eternal path of it's translated here as religion. Let me just make this statement. Most people have adopted a not very healthy appreciation of this word, because this word has number one, most people haven't actually ever met a deeply religious person. When I say deeply religious, I don't mean a person who is adhering to some particular religious institution that is promoting a certain dogma. We are talking here, it's used in reference to these principles that are glorious and wonderful, these principles of truth, principles of kindness, of mercy, of charity, to have a charitable a charitable attitude towards others. When one takes these kind of things and actually lived this kind of life, their own experience of life would be stunning and happy. And the effect that they would have on others would also be this way. And so the way in which this word, it's actually in Sanskrit, dharma, and it's often translated as religion or religiousness. But in Sanskrit, in the ancient times, they referred to what is called the Sanatana Dharma, which means the eternal nature of the soul itself, the eternal nature of the eternal living being. So Yudhisthira replied, he said, "He who is neither in debt nor exiled, and who lives simply, eats simple food in his own home, such a person is happy." And that's just like far out. And I've experienced the reality of that, like I said, living in older cultures where people lived almost like hand to mouth. I mean, when I lived in rural areas, in the mountains and stuff in the Philippines, people would want you to come and visit them. And you go to the next house, which is maybe half a kilometer away, and you visit a farming family there. And they are overjoyed to have you enter their house. And they want to seat you, they want to give you something to drink, a coconut or something that's opened, or just water. They want to make sure you are comfortable, and they want to feed you. And they will have prepared and cooked the best that they could gather and feed you. And when you're done eating, you're going to leave, and you thank them so much, and they're overjoyed that you're happy for having come and visited. They're going to start collecting, bananas and some kalabasa, squash, and things that they've got, which is like all the food that they've got there, and they're going to insist you bring it with you back to your place. And you're thinking like, whoa, they've got nothing to eat tomorrow. They're going to go out and find something to eat. And there was a joy attached to this very simple and open-hearted, kind of living. And people that live these simple kind of life, they lived in a happy way. And their death was one of great dignity, surrounded by family and friends, contemplating upon a higher spiritual truth, and were able to depart this world without any fear, without any angst, without any sadness. It's really an extraordinary thing. So in answer to the question, what is most wonderful? He said the most wonderful thing is that every day innumerable creatures go to the abode of death, and still each person thinks that they are immortal. This is what he considered the most wonderful. It's astonishing that people can live in such an ignorant state. That, I mean, if we were always aware of our mortality, you would not waste time in petty fights. You would not waste time causing pain to others. You would live with a sense of dignity. There would be a clearer sense of purpose. The choices that you would make in life would produce spectacular outcomes. So it's quite, the Yaksha was so overwhelmed. I'm not going to go on any longer. But he was so overwhelmed by the way he answered these questions. This is meant to be like a warrior. He's a politician. He's meant to be a leader of people and everything. And the fact that he could speak in such an eloquent and deeply spiritual way. The Yaksha congratulated him and returned the life to his 4 brothers and asked him, "Ask from me anything. I would like to give you some gift." He was so deeply impressed. By reflecting on these types of truths, on listening to the questions that were asked, and listening to the answer and reflecting on it in relation to our own life, we can be like the navigators of ancient times, well, not so ancient, who navigated by the stars. They weren't dependent on the GPS, turn left in 300 meters. And you're just following no matter what. I mean, they navigated their way by the stars, by the currents, the tides, the winds, the creatures, birds that they would see, aquatics. They would use these things and they would navigate thousands and thousands and thousands of miles. It was spectacular, it was extraordinary. In a similar way, if we were more thoughtful, if we slowed down, took a deep breath, and actually began to contemplate my life that I am living, this short time that I have here in this body. What should I do to make it purposeful? What should I do to bring me and others joy? How should I live? And it is these kind of responses which were considered ancient truth that made it so a person could navigate their way through life and not get blown off course, not to become overwhelmed. And that daily choices that you make reinforce your choice to live this way. They reinforce your understanding, the vision that you are developing to understand and appreciate much deeper meanings, greater value in life. And it will come down to simple things, not complicated stuff, simple things. Okay?
What was the question then?
Huh?
The question back.
The question back. The answer was that the most wonderful thing for him was that each day, thousands, countless living beings go to their death.
Yeah, I understand that.
And yet each person doesn't consider this to be a fact.
But he had a question to ask to the guy, right?
Yeah.
What was the question that he asked as well?
Um,
Gift.
the gift he asked. The gift that he asked for was, let me get to it. It's interesting. Well, let me just tell you, are we good time-wise? Nobody's panicking? You want to hear this? It's exciting. He was asked, okay, I will restore life to one of your brothers. And he asked, which one will you choose? Now, it was an interesting situation. The king had 2 wives, and there were 3 sons from one wife and twins, 2 other boys from the other. And so he said, I will choose to restore the life of one of these twins. And the guy asked, why? You've got 2 other brothers who are great heroes and great warriors, and there will come a time when you will have to fight for this kingdom. Aren't they more valuable? And he said, I have 2 mothers. And he considered them both mothers. I am the son of one of these mothers. If I was to choose another brother from her, then my second mother would be heartbroken. At least I should choose one of her sons so that she will not feel this great pain. And the yaksha was mind-blown that he was more concerned about his second mother than he was about having a powerful ally, a great general on board for wars that were to come. And he said that answer was so wonderful, he instantly restored the life of all 4 of the brothers. So he was asked, what gift can I give you? I will give you anything. The first thing he asked for was, I want to get back this, sacrificial offering sticks and paraphernalia for this sage. And he said, hey, that's already done. Don't worry about that. I'll give that to you. Ask me something else. And this is what he asked for. He said, may you grant that may you grant that I may always overcome avarice, which is greed for money, folly, which is frivolous life and frivolous decisions, and that I may never become overcome by anger. And that my mind be always inclined towards charity, to austerity, and to truth. This is what he asked as a boon. I mean, it's just like, these people were extraordinary. They were extraordinary. But these are profound and really important things. And if we want to live, even in the midst of the craziness that we currently live, we must go back to the guidance of these ancient and eternal spiritual truths and make them bit by bit part of our life. Of course, the easiest way this is going to happen is through this process of meditation. It is through the process of meditation that the heart becomes purified and cleansed and becomes fortified, and it becomes easier to make these decisions. It becomes easier to not be overly influenced by all the negative and weird things that are affecting everybody all the time. Okay? Good with that? Good segue into the kirtan. Thank you very much. So we'll chant Hari Bol Nitai Gaur mantra and maybe Gopala Govinda. Hari